Il Capitano is an interesting character because he is of the Vecchi, but he also has some Zani-esque physical comedy, as well as he's often made fun of by the other characters. So throughout the Renaissance, there were the Italian wars into the 7th century, where parts of Italy were under Spanish domination. And Il Capitano is a Spanish mercenary. He is kind of a liar, and he's very boastful and arrogant, and he's often used by Pantalone or Capitano, or not Capitano, Pantalone or Il Dottore, to kind of be the messenger, do things for them, doesn't always get his way. And he is very vain. He stops at whenever he sees an audience and looks at himself and stops at mirrors and thinks it's someone else because he's obsessed with his image. And he boasts of his exploits in war, but he's made fun of in these plays, and it has cultural significance because Italians didn't like the fact that there were Spanish mercenaries roaming around their like home for so long. And so his appearance in all of these plays is emblematic of that reality. And then lastly, the lovers. The lovers are, as Alex was saying, not deep characters where the audience is obsessed with them. They kind of just are the center of the play, and all of the action revolves around them. In in terms of stage presence, the lovers are kind of provide commentary on the instability and naivete of love. They're not really grounded in reality in a way that the other characters around them are, and they're therefore much more susceptible to be tricked by the servants or manipulated by the Vecchi. They don't wear masks, and in many ways, the plays function to kind of show off their beauty, but also their style. So in the other characters, you have very traditional costumes, but the lovers will usually be wearing kind of the forward fashion of the time. And their identity, their whole character is kind of based off of being in love. So when you think about all these characters, as Alex was saying, again, you have really specific physicality for all of them. The lovers actually are, there was a quote from a book that I read that talked about how they are not grounded to the earth. So they're always kind of teetering. And in the diagram, Alex showed the arms or where the lovers are. And this is actually because they lead with their arms. They're always swaying. They're not really grounded in the earth in a significant way. This picture is actually of me in 5th or 6th grade doing a Commedia play, and I was the king. It was called The King Stag, and I was a king, and I was a lover. So really, the play was just kind of functioning around me finding a wife at the end of the play. But I included this because when you think about physical comedy and you think about teaching it to young children, it works in a superb way because you can present the characters and ask someone. I mean, I understood this and remember it till now from 5th or 6th grade that the character's behavior and description influences completely where they lead from and their body and their movement. So the Vecchi, you have Pantalone. He always has his hand on his waist, clutching his money. It's a really clear representation. And while they're all very upright, all of the Vecchi kind of lead from their chest. Same with Il Capitano and Il Dottore, they all also have that specific gesture. So for Pantalone, it's the money. Il Dottore is often described as being weighed down by his head. He's a very cerebral character. And so even though sometimes he isn't portrayed as actually being as smart as he thinks, he's kind of consumed with his own thoughts. And so whenever he addresses the audience, he kind of plants his feet and then he is leading kind of from the top of his head. He's chest out because he is of a high class, but there's a focus on the head. And then Il Capitano, he puffs out his chest. He's still trying to enforce this like idea of his strong masculinity to the audience, even though it's somewhat transparent in certain ways. But he also has what they call a mountain step. He's wearing high heels, and so he walks very up and down. And then you have the Vecchi. They often are pigeon-toed. It's hard to show on Zoom. Pigeon-toed, and there is again a historical truth to the way that they're presented because they were all coming from different towns into the cities carrying their garments on their back. So all of the character descriptions describe this lumbar curvature, this kind of, they're very bent down and they're leading from knees, from ankles with the pigeon-toed out. But at the same time, they're completely nimble. They're going to do a somersault or a cartwheel or anything just as quickly as they're completely slumped towards the floor. And then lastly, you have the lovers, which I already said. They lead from their arms, they float around the stage. And it's a really interesting thing to think about teaching this because, as I said, it makes sense that the body moves in a way that's influenced by your character description. And we do that now when we analyze theater. We say, well, where would they lead from, or what are subconscious gestures that this character would do, psychological gestures. But this Commedia is more formulaic, and I think it's really interesting.
So lazzi are essentially comedic bits that are scripted into the Commedia form. They are generally the only pieces that are scripted. So everything between the lazzi is up to the players and the performers. Lazzis are generally specific to the troops and their specific talent set. So if you have someone who is an acrobat, you're probably going to get a lot of somersaults and a lot of physical comedy in that way. It's also entirely based off of audience reaction. So if the audience is really liking the burping and the farting, then they might lay that on a little bit thicker in that performance. So if we look at Commedia today, there's actually a very prominent form at the moment. So Commedia as a form is the predecessor to modern improv comedy, in which actors are, or players as they're called, perform entirely unscripted shows using suggestions from the audience. So as a shameless plug, I am part of the Otter Nonsense Players at Middlebury, which is my little logo in the corner there. And we recently had a socially distant show. So I thought that I'd torture you all by making you watch a short clip of college improv, which is everyone's favorite thing to do. So the major difference in Commedia versus modern improv is that Commedia has the lazzi, which are the scripted elements. And so the movement between those lazzi are what is improvised, and the dialogue and specific physical pieces within those lazzi are also improvised, but the general structure of it is pretty rigid. Versus modern improv, which is entirely unscripted, but there are certain tropes and bits that appear in most forms. So like it says here, the best improv looks scripted. If you finish a show and someone doesn't believe that it was entirely improvised, it means you did a good job. And that's because there are several rules of improv that everyone follows if you're a good improviser, and it can make it seem seamless, much like the lazzi do for the Commedia. So some basic rules are yes and. If someone makes an establishment about the scene, you have to, as a scene partner, take it and run with it. If I say we're on the moon, we're on the moon. Can't say we're not on the moon or else it kills the scene. Some other basic ones: no killing your scene partner, make statements, not question, and create a realistic space. So if I set something down on this imaginary table and then Aiden runs through and crashes through my cup and doesn't say anything about it, then you've entirely just made that scene not make any sense anymore. So while those are not scripts, they are prescriptive, and that's what keeps improv kind of on the rails and not just a hot mess, much like Commedia. So the other thing is that while there aren't stock characters in long form improv, which is what my troupe specializes in, which is basically just you're doing a mini play the whole time, actors most likely appear in the same mini play as multiple characters, meaning that the choices that they make both vocally and physically have to be very distinct, so that if you reappear as an earlier character in the scene, the audience doesn't get confused and think that you're a new character or something like that. So I'm going to show you some clips of improv.
I'm taking you somewhere else very soon. I'm going to put my reading glasses. Did you know that your class is that much that you'd rather be somewhere else? Somewhere everything's good.
The classes were pretty boring. What's the alternative? I don't.
So I see you're trying to put down your grandfather.
Yes, I know you can do it for dogs, but can you do it for him?
I've never done anything bigger than a Shih Tzu, but I think that if we pack him really small,
Yeah. I mean, I'll pay for 10 doses of Shih Tzu, and what do you say, like next week? I'll swing by. I'll tell him he's going to do his memory class where he's asked to remember everything he's ever learned.
that sounds worse.
Let's get in the car.
This reminds me of when
10 Shih Tzus.
Say, I don't remember getting into this vet place.
So this isn't the best example in the world, but it's the only one that I have on video, so I thought it was fun to show. But between those scenes, there was about 5 minutes where I appeared and reappeared as different characters. I think in that specific one, I appeared as a mutant plant and also a child receiving a Christmas present. It was a crazy show. um, but because I had established that when I come on and I put my leg up on the chair, I am that evil vet character, then I was able to come back as that returning character, and no one, including my scene partners and the audience, really misses a beat, and it all is a cohesive thing, much like the Zani always being the slapstick humor, the one always leading with their feet, and so on and so forth.
So some people say that Commedia gained so much popularity because at the time the forms of theater were more about memorizing your lines and kind of these more rigid plays. And then as a result, Commedia was born, and it was loud and it was colorful and crazy and funny. And it did gain a lot of popularity, and we see versions of it in the following years that it was first created in France and England. We see characters from Commedia represented in Shakespeare, but we also see characters in Commedia influenced by Greek and Roman playwrights. But overall, we still see examples of Commedia on stages. And Tufts really recently did the one that I was in 5th or 6th grade. It is a really fun form of theater, and it's fun to analyze because it really shows how history and culture affect what we see on stage and why certain characters or certain forms of theater gain popularity. Thank you.
Sick.